Prince of Darkness, Part 2, Vect Ascendant. From highest to lowest, the dark city had been awash with excited rumour. All had salivated at the chance to witness a spectacle that must be brewing in the Spire quarter owned by Lord Zelian. How Vect and his ruffians had taken a handsome price indeed, had it subsequently been stolen from them in kind. Lord Zelian had overawed the so-called Cabal of the Black Heart, the gutter scum who had been rising in power, guarding sacred sites, acting as cat's paws and blades for many a noble rivalry. Yet they were rabble, and all knew it. Oh, in recent centuries, matters had changed. The Eldari Empire that ruled for eons untold had been extinguished in a single night. The line of reincarnation had been severed. Gifts considered Eldari birthright were now not only banned, but out of reach of the Eladrithanese. The Dark Ones, as they were called by their supine craft-world cousins, peasants. They had fled from the glory of the new paradigm, hiding in the past on their world ships, attempting to flee from the reality of their new existence. Still, no matter how things changed, some things always stayed the same. Nothing could approach the potence of the ancient nobility, and all knew it. They did not think it or believe it from the top of their heads to the tips of their toes. They all knew it. For who could challenge the subtlety and skill of souls that had ruled unopposed for millions of years? Thus mused Baron Val Thron. He walked under the strange light of the twin sons of Cormorah, and this merely confirmed his perspective. He remembered the carnage of the soulic cults, how they had risen and thought themselves equal to the ancient aristocracy. Despite their power and the number of blades they eventually commanded, the nobility exterminated them, root and branch. Bronn sneered as he encompassed the sheer egotism that had made these fools believe they could challenge the strength of old. Baron Thalvron sighed as he reached his destination and waved a hand before a glyph. Once, he would have activated it with his mind, but now it scanned his genetic signature and then slid open. He mentally relaxed an iota as he walked inside. The Dark City was always a place of brutal threat and competition. The most dangerous part of his day was always the journey to and from his designated toil. Odd that he did not witness anyone preparing to leave. Too odd. Vronn's lithe but powerful muscles tightened as he dropped into a combat stance and drew out splinter pistol and blade. He stalked down the corridor, senses aflame, looking and listening out for any movement, any ambush. Yet he heard nothing. As he carefully ascended the spiral staircase that led to the main observation tower, all he could hear was the hum of the pulsating energies that filled this place, the slight shift of tone and chime that came from the command room above him. No words, no chatter, no movement whatsoever. Vronn padded like a gyrinx, silent, stealthy. Finally, he prowled to the door to witness that it was stuck open, unusual in the extreme, unheard of. He rolled from one side of it to the other, snatching a single glimpse in transit. He stood on the other side of that portal, but could not believe what his darted vision held. He sheathed his blade and used his dexterity to position himself above the portal, lowering his head just enough to see. Not at either side of the door, where any would expect an interloper's head to appear. He stared for a full second, before dropping down and padding inside. For nothing in that room now breathed. He avoided the runnels of blood that streaked the floor like marble stains. Only 2 of them had managed to get out of their chairs before death had come for them. A half-dozen Eldar who he knew well. All had their throats slit, their skulls smashed in. But before he could raise any alarm, his eyes widened. For this was the control center for the Desdarian portal, the main entry or exit from the Dark City into real space. And it now burst into life. A tear in space roared into existence, blinding him for a second, so intense was it. As the afterglow lifted from his vision, he could make out the shapes that had now poured into his home. Klaxons screamed the danger as a shudder went down his spine. Mon-Kay. Huge ships, warships. There were over a score of them, and they instantly opened fire. Lord Zelian jumped from his dais as the whole throne room shook. His guards looked around above, then to him. The exquisite windows depicting countless atrocities burst inwards and scattered their priceless elegance across the floor. Without their sound-suppressing protection, the unmistakable clangor of unfettered war crashed into everyone present. Lights burst across the strange skies of Khor-Mora, flashes that heralded death being meted out on an industrial scale. Zelian experienced something he had not felt for centuries, if not millennia. Shock. Surprise. He was utterly unaware of the genesis of this furore. Members of his honor guard crept towards the windows and looked out as Zelian received communiques from the only 2 beings in the city that even approached his splendor. Lords Krelak and Ilithian. He flicked a subtle dial on his wrist, and ghostly images of both appeared before him. Lord Ilithian snapped out first. "What fresh hell is this?" Lord Krelak sneered at Ilithian as he then whipped his attention to Zelian. "The Desdarian portal has been breached by Mon-Kay ships of the line. 24 of them, each filled with their transhuman monstrosities. Zelian, it seems your prize has drawn a rescue party." Lord Zelian's face remained passive as he retorted to the barb. He had walked to the broken windows and was looking out at the carnage being dealt by the Imperial ships. Zelian sneered. "That worm, Vect, brought them here. I merely took the prize from the child's grubbing grasp." "Enough! Cause and retribution can follow anon. We have no time to bicker or dicker. The vermin must be destroyed." Krelak nodded in agreement, as did Zelian. Krelak snapped. "I am rousing the blades. Zelian, summon your fleet immediately. Ilithian, just do something for a change, but do it now." Zelian ignored this outburst and retorted. "Let us destroy them together. Inform your blades. No capture, no trickery, no hunting for profit. Extermination is the only required outcome." The communique was broken, and Zelian now looked out without distraction. These were Mon-Kay ships, but they all looked the same, all bar one. The mighty battle barge at the center of the Imperial fleet was coasting in his direction, straight towards the region he held the Forge Hammer. The Space Marine ship he had even now, right in the middle of his holdings. The other ships were no small matter either, each the size of a cruiser, each filled to the brim with the bioengineered Mon-Kay warriors they called Space Marines. Nor was it the heraldry of just one formation of the ugly, ungainly monsters. More than one fraternity of Marines was present in the assault fleet. As he watched, the Imperial ship's macro-cannon batteries unloaded volley after volley into every spire they could see. The destruction was of a degree none had witnessed. entire segments of the Dark City falling in upon themselves as towers and columns came crashing down to the depths below. Tens of thousands of Eldari had almost certainly perished in the mere seconds he had took to witness the assault. Zelian cursed and spat, then swept from the room to rouse his blades. On the bridge of the Salamander's battle barge, Vulcan's Wrath, the chapter master looked on calmly. His bridge was a cacophony of activity, data screeds printing, screens exploding with flashes of explosions. His officers barked orders and reports to one another without hesitation nor drama. He was a sea of tranquility amidst the storm. Captain Focus was his ally, brother and friend. Nor was he oblivious to the call from Liberian Hestion, that which had made it possible to find this. He did not know what. All they had known was that the Eldar scum had attacked one of their ships, the Forgehammer, and they had taken it intact. It was not merely a matter of honor. It was a matter of security for the entire Imperium. A captain of the Astartes held more information than could be tolerated to fall into the hands of any Xenos, let alone the arch scum, the degenerate Eldar. The chapter master had not hesitated, and the call was sent, not only to his own men, the Salamanders, but to any who would stand with them against the perfidious Xenos scum. Hence, his fleet had been augmented by ships and warriors from both the Howling Griffons and Silver Skull chapters. They were men of renown, warriors of honor, so he had welcomed them into his force, yet none knew exactly what they would find on this hunt. When they had pushed through the shielded region of space that was the last place the Forgehammer had been detected, they were ready for anything. Well, they thought they had been. Now the miniature fleet of 24 strike cruisers and the Vulcan's Wrath seemed to have hit the jackpot. Not only could they see exactly where the Forgehammer was locked in place, but they had come into the very heart of some form of Xenos city. He had ordered the gunnery decks to open fire, and the Emperor's wrath had unleashed into the Xenos en masse. The gunnery teams were flayed as their overseers pushed them harder than they had ever done before. So many targets, so many enemies. A target-rich environment was the understatement of the millennium. An ensign barked over the clamour. "Enemy ships approaching! Readings of massed aerial formations also. Some as small as a man. Most are shoals of fighter craft on an attack vector." The chapter master indicated the readings to be uploaded to the main screens. It was true. Xenos scum with wings aplenty, their dart-like ships coming in. Fighters armed with dark-light weaponry zigzagged as they came on, attempting to evade as much Astartes flak as possible. The chapter master calmly stated, "Keep firing all out-of-arc weapon batteries on the spires. All batteries that can, lock onto the priorities, the enemy fleet elements. Point defense arrays, concentrate on their fighters and winged warriors. Let none approach our hull. All Astartes, report to hangar bays. Prepare for drop assault. Transmit that to the fleet." He watched as the comms officers did just that, then looked to his own helmsman. "Take us down. Approach the Forgehammer." He then spoke into his own vox bead. "First company, report to Teleportarum." Death spat out from the hulking monolithic human ships, tearing into fighters and Dukari vessels. Burnt wrecks now littered the streets and avenues of the Dark City. Anywhere Varanash looked, there was flame and destruction, beauty that had lasted millennia, now rubble and ruin. He turned at a pace no Monkey could ever manage, not even these demons. Avoiding flak from the clumsy turrets of the enemy ships, he darted down and fired on the vessel before him. His dark light weapon searing thin trenches into the Imperial ship before sweeping out again. The armor of these behemoths was meters thick. He had effectively done absolutely nothing. His communications device blinked, and he read the message in a single snapped glance. The message was simple. Ignore the hull. Shoot out their weapons banks. Varanash soared up and then down again. Instead of loosing shot after shot, he restrained every impulse and waited until he could get a single pinpoint accurate blast into the side of one of their crude barrage weapons. His dark light beams crashed into the slither of undefended connections at its base. The weapon instantly went limp, and its anger was silenced. Varanash saw hundreds of his peers doing the same all across the frantic firefight. Razorwing fighters and Void Raven bombers swarmed the enemy like flies, each shot as accurate as his own, each dive slowly stripping the Monkey of their fury. Still, they fought on, taking hundreds of pilots, scores of ships, and dozens of spires down as they lumbered on. The Monkey were implacable. But soon, they would be sitting ducks, toothless to stop what would invariably come next. Varanash whooped as he took out another of the weapons, counting a half-dozen from himself alone. Then he witnessed something that chilled even his cold heart. As enemy ships ceased firing for a moment, and out of each came a landslide of tear-shaped pods. Many fighters were slain by the impact of these seemingly indestructible boxes of metal, but he knew they were not the target of these clumsy weapons. They were not weapons at all. They were a delivery mechanism. As a teardrop slammed into spires and boulevards below, they did not explode. They did not lay inert. He saw flames burst out from each as they approached their target, decelerating rapidly. Then, when they touched down, doors would open and outpour the armored warriors of the Emperor of Mankind's Astartes. In the very heart of Cormorah, the Dark City, the Space Marines had been unleashed. Hundreds of them. The city was burning. The destruction doled out by the Monkey had been catastrophic. But now matters were worse. They were on the ground amidst the populace, forming a cordon around the region where the Forgehammer was moored. The heavily armoured elite soldiery of the humans slaughtered without restraint. Their weapons punched through Cabalite armour as if it were paper, even brought down the legendary Incubi. That was their basic firearm. Their frag missiles swept scores of tightly packed Hellions and Scourges from the skies. Their las cannons tore through Raiders and Vipers. Their plasma and melter weapons burnt everything they touched. The flamers of the Salamanders swept across entire congregations of nimble witches who could not evade such blankets of promethium. Lord Kralik was livid. So much so that he deigned to work alongside the gang of scum who had come to help defend the realm. The homunculi emptied their menageries of killing machines, the Rax, Talos and Cross Pain engines. Scores of Reaver gangs and massive packs of Hellions dove down on the enemy. Yet these Monkey warriors seemed to be angels of death. The Eldar splinter rifles did not pierce their armour. They were swift enough to evade heavier firepower, lethal in close combat. When underestimated, when the fire of rage was hot and led to missteps through fury alone, the Marines tore through entire packs of witches. They seemed unstoppable. It was as though they had been sent by Calum and Chicane in retribution. The fact that they were filthy lesser beings made the affront the more stinging. Hence, the rage which fueled the Eldari left them uncharacteristically prone to the methods being utilized against them. None could tell exactly how many of them had been shot down onto the surface, but Kralak knew it could not have been less than 400 or 500. Each a tank, each a bioengineered killing machine, each with a heart of fire that seemed to know no restraint, no hesitation, and absolutely no fear. Kralak took stock of his data scanners. The noble houses had come in strength to match that of the scum who dwelt in the dark. The finest and fiercest in all of Cormoran now supported the rabble, taking the lead, pushing back the mindless animalistic invaders. But there, at the heart of the biggest push, was Lord Kralik himself. He did not stand back, his plans and orders shot to each of his underlings, each of the lesser houses, and in he went. Surrounded by his incubi guard in a dozen venom transports, they descended on the heart of the battle, the largest concentration of space marines. Odd reports had come to him over the last seconds. Morantal Vel, Karash Hen, Xenian Dort, each had been slain. How? They were not in the direst fighting. Kralak's spine tingled. Something was deeply wrong. Even with all this going on, he could feel the hand of death on his shoulder. Yet, he exulted in it. So many years of pandas and politicking, it felt good to be in the heart of the fray, and he felt alive. Kralak led his men into the front of the Marines, easily ducking and diving to evade their clumsy fire. Oh, they were fast and accurate for Monkey, but he was a lord of the Eldari. He was born for this. He span under a volley of bolter fire, then came up with his husk blade, easily tearing through the ceramite armor of the Goliath Marine. The infinitesimal touch of the blade tore all the water from the Marine, desiccating him instantly. His incubi guard waded into the foe, but were matched blade to blade, a rarity indeed. Kralak twisted and pirouetted like a harlequin, dealing death with every strike of his husk blade, personally turning the tide in this segment, accounting for 5 Marines himself. His men pushed forward, as Kralak now leapt to a high piece of broken masonry to view the battlefield and most immediate threats. Yet another icon disappeared from the chevrons of the nobility. Another lord had been spent. How? Kralak was wondering just that, when a blast he never saw tore through his shielding. Lord Kralak's armor was of no consequence, as dark matter skimmed from the edges of a black hole, vaporized him. Kralak's guard knew that nothing had come from the fore. The shot had been Eldari Darklight, and had come from behind. The forge hammer languished in its holding area, but its occupants coordinated their activity with that of their brothers now outside. The Dark Eldar that held this region was swarming its hull, preparing to defend their hall. It was then the dazzling lights flashed across the ship. When each ball of energy subsided, in its place stood a First Company veteran, armed in tactical dreadnought armor. The Terminators then proved their namesake, and did exactly that. They terminated any Eldar in their path. Though the armor itself was slow, the reflexes and accuracy of the Marines within was not. Stormbolter fire punched through the bodysuits of the Eldar and created blood fountains of everyone they hit. The Dark Eldar were used to predating on those weaker and confused, always striking from the shadows, always at the advantage. In a pitched battle against walking tanks, with no cover or obvious place of withdrawal, the Space Marines butchered them with contemptuous ease. But it was not as simple as that. For the defences that should have keyed in and opened fire on the Astartes, the formidable protections and punishments of the Xelian court had been disabled. Lord Xelian cursed, for he knew the cause of it all. He had allowed a snake to slither into the very heart of his facilities. Worse, he had invited it in. Vect and his scum had been attacking the Forge Hammer for days, all while in the middle of his compound. Now he knew why that cunny gutter snipe had agreed to such a stacked deck, such an obvious trap. For, of course, as soon as they had taken the Marines out of that vessel, he would have taken them off Vect. The cabal of the Black Heart had burnt through many a mercenary group. Now Xelian saw that it was all his affiliated struts, those pillars that supported his very palace of power. And Xelian's forces were every bit as engaged with the Marines as were those of Lord Ilithian and the late Lord Kralak. A surprise, a shock. Kralak dead. Even if they had wanted to retreat, or not even engage to protect their forces, they would then cede power. For the duty of the ruler is to protect its people. Even the cruelty of the Dark City, the Lord is the one who strikes down his enemies, the being that all pay homage to, for protection. If the triad of lords and the nobility entire had refused to engage, they would be stripped of power, they would lose blades like a river, would be scorned by everyone from highest to lowest. This was the perfect trap. Yet again, as Xelian mused, he witnessed matters get even worse. The Terminators had cleared away the only warriors holding back the Space Marines on the Forgehammer. Then they shot crack missiles and other heavy weapons into the mooring points that held the Forgehammer in place. And horror was unleashed upon the Dark City. Xelian had offered a handsome price to the gangs of Reavers, Hellions and Scourges to come to this place and fight the Monkey. Now! Payment of a level too high to ignore. So many had come, but it was to no avail. The Marines inside the Forgehammer had waited, fighting an endless siege for 16 days without respite or relent. And now they took revenge. The figure of this revenge was the man who had made all of this possible. It was Librarian Hestian. Exulting in his brother's arrival, harboring the hatred he had felt in his heart for the Xenos enemy, he unleashed a weapon of staggering potence, his own mind. Hestian now reached deep within and connected to the warp and sent out streams of fire that took on a life of its own. Shaped like a mighty salamander, the fire drake burned through the air for all to see. It burnt the aerial attackers by the hundreds, slaughtering them with its fiery rage. Yet, this was no simple trick of the warp. It had a massive effect on the morale of the Dark Eldar. Psychic powers are expressly forbidden in the Dark City, so much so that Eldar no longer access that part of their minds, if they can at all, after being so twisted by She Who Thirsts. It was outlawed, as the webway is so very close to the realm of the warp, where She Who Thirsts awaits all Eldar to consume their souls. And all knew this, as they feel her supping on their spirits every second of every day. As such, Cormorah had been shaken before in what were known as disjunctions, the most terrible threat to the entire population. A disjunction meant a hole had been made into the warp, and the demons of Slaanesh could walk the city, slaying and dragging souls to their master. All knew that the webway was a construct, a bubble of reality that could well be burst. And if it was, then it would submerge all present into the warp. This flagrant use of psyker abilities at this grade made many shudder and retreat. Hence they did not just flee from the fires of retribution, they fled from the threat of eternal torture at the hands of the Prince of Pleasure. And so, the Forgehammer came to life, its moorings broken, and rose into the sky. The battle was intense, but the forces of Monkey now boarded swift strike craft or teleported back to their ships of origin. Some were left, it was true, but scant few compared to the extermination they had meted out to Cormorah and its people. Those that stayed traded their lives for stacks of Eldari dead, and just as swiftly as they had arrived, the Space Marine fleet wheeled and went back through the Desterian portal into real space. But while all of this was going on, the betrayal became blatant. In the last stages of the battle, while the Space Marines left behind still fought, The warriors of the Cabal of the Black Heart and nearly every other non-aligned force of Eldari turned on the blades of the aristocracy. They attacked them from behind. So many nobles had been slain fighting Astartes, but just as many were taken by friendly fire. Now it was seen that these accidents were not so friendly after all, as the nobles were assailed from all sides and their numbers smashed. The Space Marine fleet had now gone, but so too had the strength of the nobility. Their spires had been blown apart, their palaces smashed, their warriors annihilated by the Monkey and the traitorous forces of Eldar, who wanted nothing more than to tear them down after millennia of unspeakable tyranny. Although Xilian and Elithian survived the day, as did many a minor noble, their power was broken by the cunning, skill and skullduggery of one man, the Archon of the Cabal of the Black Heart, the new supreme overlord of Khor-Mora, Asdrubael Vect. Vect the Cruel, Vect the Unassailable, Lord of the Black Heart. Yes, the Dark Heart were now ascendant, so unquestioningly that other cabals now formed to copy the perceived template of his success. Still, even after all he had achieved, some thought it was the structure of his organization that had brought him power. Such Eldar men and women as this did not last long. Often the new cabals were formed around what remained of a noble house. Even so, the Darwinian power unleashed in Khor-Mora meant a staggering shift from hereditary power to outright meritocracy of the vilest kind. The darkest souls would rise to the top in all of these organizations, through assassination, direct challenge, or slow dripping erosion. Despite that not all of them were dead, the nobility's stranglehold on power was gone, and it would never return. Vect had sacrificed the beauty of the ancient port of Khor-Mora and the entire status quo. He had planned this from the start. It was he who attracted the Marines with his real space raids. It was he who permitted their entry into the Dark City by exterminating the Eldar monitoring the Desdarian portal. Vect had used the Marines as catspaws to annihilate his enemies while the entire city fought for its very life. And all knew it. They didn't suspect it. They knew. Vect broke every rule to achieve this, and nothing would ever be the same. The spirit of ennui that had gripped the Dark City was over. A terrible new dawn had risen. The time of Asdrubael Vect. The time of true horror. The change in leadership brought a billion little changes that transformed the whole. The entire city was self-absorbed, but now it was also forward-thinking. The Dark City was now a thing of not just decadence and hedonism, but of directed malice to all living things. Thus, the old nobility that remained formed cabals of their own, but with such depleted resources, they were little more than a nuisance to Vect. Many of the eldest of them simply walked away from the constant politics, or joined existing or formed new covens of homunculi. Their power had been robbed, but their spite would now be expressed in the macabre and terrible experience of that order. They retreated into deeper depths of horror, but never struck a Vect again. At least, not blatantly. Consolidation. Vect proved no feckless noble. He was driven to an extent none could fathom, because, unlike the aristocrats, when he became supreme overlord, he did not stop there. Over the next centuries, Vect then consolidated and expanded his power even further, not only over the reins of power, but on the very geography of the webway. There had always been satellite stations, ports and pathways, smaller bubbles of the webway that were held by Drukhari. And as I stated before, the Eldar could not create new webway veins or tributaries, but they had just enough knowledge, skill, and technology to brute alter that which existed. Vect did so en masse. He drew every holding, no matter how distant, so that it became a part of the Dark City. It took thousands of years of constant warfare, but this was always used by Vect to decimate rising powers, remove challengers, burn out his enemies within as much as without. He drew all of these realms together, the better to rule them with an iron gauntlet. To say that he was utterly undisputed is hyperbole, for every Archon, no matter how potent or clever, always had challenges, declared or not. But Vect could and did play his enemies off against one another, perpetually playing the Game of Thrones, annihilating his enemies on the blades of their own rivals, shifting support, assassination, and permitting others to overextend before he then removed them from power, or the entire organization slaughtered. To be the supreme overlord of such jackals would exhaust any in time. Yet Vect thrived on the challenge, growing into his position more with each passing year. The last true challenge to his authority in that period may have been from Archon El-Uriak of Shaddam. El-Uriak took millennia to gather all those who openly hated Vect. He built his power in similar ways to Vect also, until finally his was the only sub-realm not connected directly to Qomorrah. El-Uriak named himself the Emperor of Shaddam, and declared that he was the only being worthy of rulership of the Eladrith Enis, the Dark Eldar. Vect was enraged on the outside. Of course he was. He proclaimed that he would slay El-Uriak himself, but this seemed impossible. Shaddam had too many blades, too many defenses. Should the Cabal of the Blackheart attack, even if they won, even if Vect slew El-Uriak, their power would be shattered. They would be vulnerable to a plethora of other Cabals and outfits. So, for the first time in centuries, Vect looked weak. Yet only 3 days later, he did it again. If it's not broke, why fix it? A warp portal opened above Shaddam, and a huge Imperial battleship came careening out of the warp. It managed to get just far enough to be at the very center of Shaddam before its engines exploded. The detonation did not just destroy the palace of El-Uriak, it twisted reality and created a disjunction. And the streets and avenues of Shaddam were overwhelmed by a tidal wave of demons. Shaddam was utterly destroyed. Vect had made his point. He stood alone. He was the supreme overlord. But what of the future? What of his court? What of his plans? What of the era Indomitus? What of the coming of Inyad? Well, gentle listener, that we shall get to soon. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and please, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.